Final Fantasy X remains one of the most popular entries in the series, and justifiably so due to numerous innovations it introduced. It was Final Fantasy's first game on the new PlayStation 2, and featured fully rendered 3D environments and characters, motion capture, voice acting, a unique new combat system, and, like all Final Fantasy games, an amazing story with engaging characters and top-tier music. Today we're going to be looking at Yuna's theme, and what makes her and her music so special. And a big thank you to YouTube users Zacky Puff Snurple and the Gaming Bumpkin for requesting this one. First things first, who is Yuna? She is a far more complicated character than she initially appears. When we first meet her, she seems quiet, shy, naive, maybe a bit sheltered. But to understand the depth of her character, we need to understand the depth of the world and story first. At this point, I'll be diving headfirst into spoilers, so continue watching when you're ready to hear some hard truths about Spira, summoners, and the oppressive theocratic regime that runs the world. 10 continued the Final Fantasy tradition of commenting on real-world issues through a fictional world story. 6 confronted problems of racial inequality and treatment of other people in its depiction of the Empire's dealings with the Espers. 7 made bold statements about the importance of ecological conservation and the evils of large corporate greed. 8 addressed the horrors of a society that indoctrinates children into becoming soldiers from an early age and the trauma that accompanies that. 9 calmed down a bit and simply dealt with issues of self-identity and free will. Then, Final Fantasy X ramped it back up and gave us a world in which organized religion has cultivated a society where the leaders of the church impose a dogmatic authoritarianism on the common folk completely divorced from the original teachings of that religion, resulting in rampant death and destruction. Big philosophical arguments aside, Final Fantasy X does indeed tell a story about the dangers of a powerful few running a government in the name of religion that very few, if any, still remember the origin of. It's a world where a huge monster pointedly named Sin appears every few years to wreak havoc on the world and its people as the penalty for their alleged wickedness. It's a world where people like Yuna and her father must take on the mantle of summoner and give up everything for a chance to defeat Sin. Now, importantly, the main character of Final Fantasy X is not Yuna, it's Tidus. He tells us as much in the opening cutscene. But while this may be his story, he is not the primary protagonist of it. He's simply the one through whose eyes we watch the story unfold. Yuna is the main protagonist. It is her quest and conflict that provide the impetus for the story. Simply put, without Yuna, there is no story. In Spira, summoners are the only ones capable of defeating Sin and bringing about the calm, even temporarily. Yuna becomes a summoner to follow in the footsteps of her father, Braska, who had defeated Sin previously. As part of her pilgrimage, she must pray at various temples around Spira to gain the support and power of the Aeons, which are used to fight Sin. On her journey, she is protected by guardians, and while a summoner can have any number of guardians, Yuna ends up traveling with 6. In the beginning, everyone dismisses Tidus' claim of being from Zanarkand as crazy and evidence that he's been hit by Sin's neurotoxin. After all, that city was destroyed 1,000 years ago. Only Yuna believes him because she reveals that her father's guardian, Jecht, who happens to also be Tidus' father, also claimed to be from Zanarkand. Neither Tidus nor Jecht were able to provide any evidence of this claim, but Yuna trusts Tidus anyway. Tidus, who is used to being a hotshot pro athlete and thronged by adoring fans, initially tries to turn on the charm with Yuna, who shies away a bit, making it seem as though she may just be immature and unused to being the target of flirtation. But there's more to it than that. When we see a small fishing village destroyed by Sin, it is revealed that part of a summoner's duty is to send the dead to the far plane so that their souls don't stay trapped on Earth and become monsters. This responsibility weighs heavily on a summoner who must make sure that the ceremony is done correctly, and at only 17 years old, it weighs extra heavily on Yuna. We find out later on, however, that we still don't fully understand Yuna. Tidus, as an outsider, has no concept of what a summoner's pilgrimage means, but Yuna and all her other guardians do. The ultimate objective of the summoner's path is to sacrifice oneself to summon the final Aeon, the only thing that has a chance of defeating sin. When this is finally revealed, it immediately deepens Yuna's character. She isn't just quiet and shy, she's reserved. She's learned to keep people at arm's length, to avoid making any meaningful and lasting relationships, because that would only make it harder to commit to her sacrificial duties. What we thought was quiet was in fact introspective. What we thought was shyness was in fact self-protection. And what we thought was naivete was in fact an obligation to believe in the goodness of the world around her, because how else could she justify giving up her own life for everyone else? So now that we have started to understand who Yuna is, let's take a look at her theme. For now, I'm going to skip over the 4-bar introduction, but rest assured that we will be back to examine it. Let's start where the melody begins. The theme is in F major, and the melody couldn't represent that any more simply. The first 4 notes outline a tonic triad, establishing our home chord. After a pause on Re, we invert the original pattern back down to Do, skipping to La, then echoing the first motif again to end the phrase on La. The second phrase closely imitates the first, except instead of descending to La, this time we rise to La. Composers take note, this is a very common and simple way to cast your first 2 phrases in a way that builds intensity without requiring new musical material. After these 2 phrases, the melody slows down a bit and we get a new motif of 4 descending notes. The first set of notes descends from La to Mi. The second set descends through So, Mi, and Ti to La, but replaces La at the last minute with an escape tone to Do. The third set descends Mi, Re, Do to So, with another escape pattern to keep things from becoming repetitive. The final set inverts the pattern, leaping from Mi to Ti, then using neighbor tone So to get to La. Notice for a moment how many times we've had a phrase end on La so far. If you're at all familiar with conventional Western practice, you should be thinking about things like half cadences and 5 chords, which are a typical way to pause at the end of a phrase if you plan on continuing on. Traditionally, these phrases always end on So. It's the second most stable note of the scale after Do, but invokes a strong pull to continue motion. La has more melodic tendency than So, and so it's an unusual note to pause on at the end of a phrase. I want you to hold on to this for a few minutes while we take a look at the harmony that supports this melody. It starts off as simply as the melody. We get a 1 chord moving to a 5 chord, classic, then descending through 6, 7, 5, 4, 2, then ending 1, 5, 4. Ending on 4 instead of 5 is odd. As we discussed in the melody, we usually pause on a half cadence with So, but this pauses on 4 with La, a plagal half cadence, if you will. Overall, this chord progression is supported by a bass line descending stepwise through almost the entire scale. The least conventional thing about this is the motion from 2 to 1. This isn't a typical progression. But this isn't the first time we've seen this particular progression. If you've seen my video analyzing Aerith's theme, this should ring a bell, and if you haven't, hop on over there after this and watch it. Aerith's theme likewise uses 4 rather than 5 at a cadence, but at the end called a plagal cadence, and with a weakened 2 substitution. In her theme, I suggested that it represented her aversion to completing the duties that she knew she had to undertake. Knowing now what we know about Yuna's particular duties, we can understand how it may represent the same for her as well. But there's a bit more to it, because throughout Western musical history, the plagal cadence, commonly referred to as the Amen cadence, has been closely associated with sacred, specifically Christian, music. The history of the relationship between 4/1 cadence and the concluding word of prayer Amen is of course long and convoluted, but can be traced with some certainty back to the 16th century in England. Thomas Tallis, a pioneer in the world of Western sacred music, is considered by many to be the first to consistently pair the plagal cadence with Amen. There are examples that predate Tallis, of course, but he is the most prominent composer of the sacred genre. As a Catholic, he worked for the Church of England during a turbulent time, when the monarchy was changing left and right and alternating between outlawing Catholicism or Protestantism. Tallis stayed afloat in the rough seas of theocracy by adjusting his style to suit the regent of the day, but his use of plagal cadences remained fairly consistent. Incidentally, nobody much cared about Tallis after his death, so why did the plagal Amen combination persist? Well, it didn't really, until the mid-19th century when English composers became enraptured by the so-called Golden Age and tried to emulate the great artists of the time, especially Tallis. The connection between 4/1 and Amen became solidified with the publishing of the book Hymns Ancient and Modern in 1861, which made sure to include the plagal Amen at the end of every song. So knowing that history, there is a deeper level to this somewhat ubiquitous use of 4 that pervades both Yuna's and Aerith's theme. Both of them are characters on a spiritual journey, Aerith following the spirit of the planet, and Yuna following the teachings of the church. The plagal cadences in Aerith's theme and the plagal half cadence in Yuna's theme really demonstrate their respective places in society. Following the plagal half cadence at the end of the first phrase, the second phrase energizes the harmony a bit more. Rather than these block chords from before, we now hear broken chords, with a chromatic passing C-sharp moving us from 5 to 6, but overall the harmonic structure remains the same. That is, until the end, where instead of moving to the plagal cadence through 5, we move through 3. This is emphasized with the B natural borrowed from A minor, on which the 3 chord is built. These first 2 phrases give us a lot of insight into Yuna already. The melody is fairly simple and straightforward, with no surprise chromatic notes or dissonances. We get a musical sense of this reserved character, whose outlook on the world is fairly black and white. The world is wicked, sin is the punishment, the Church of Yu Yevon is good and right and the path to follow. Even these initial block chords moving on the beat give us a sense of an almost pedantic approach to life. But who can blame her? She's been training her whole life to sacrifice herself, there's certainly no hurry. The next phrase, as we've seen already, is made up of short melodic statements with no clear arc or direction. The key thing here is the addition of other instruments. Up to this point, the simple melody has been played by a solo instrument with some piano accompaniment. Here, the solo voice is joined by the flute, supporting the same melody a third higher, and the strings, which provide movement after the melody has settled. Perhaps this section is showing how Yuna comes to rely on her guardians more. At the beginning, she is sure of her path and responsibilities, and holds her friends at arm's length to protect both herself and them. As her journey goes on, however, it becomes more difficult and more dangerous, and she becomes closer and closer to her guardians, who are always there to support her. The harmony here is alternating between A minor and B flat major, 3 and 4 respectively, which could represent the particular struggles and challenges that face the party, but that they always seem to get out of all right. This section ends with B flat major again, another plagal resolution, but does not rest there, moving on instead to G minor, 2, like in Aerith's theme. Then, surprise, it finally lands on D major, which is a major 6 in F, but really just a new key. And look at that, the resolution from G to D is a 4-1 cadence. Plagal again. How did we get from F major to D major, which uses F sharp, without it sounding jarring? Well, the strings landed on a D way back here with this B flat major, then held it through G minor, and it became a common tone modulation. By this point, we've heard D long enough that we can imagine it being our new home pitch. From here, it looks like we're going to get the same melody again, but in D, but the harmony in the second measure cancels out the C sharp, and the following measure brings back B flat and F natural in a subtle variation of the original tune. It still ends on D, and the harmony tries to bring back D major with these B naturals and F sharps, but ultimately it ends back up on B flat major, which loops us around to the beginning. This D major section is odd. It doesn't spin very long in the new key, and modulating from 1 to major 6 is not common. I think it shows how Yuna's way of thinking changes over the course of the game. The melody is similar to the beginning, but changes a bit to accommodate a different key, like maybe the carefree approach of this wild hotshot from an impossible city is starting to rub off on her. Maybe there's more than one way to look at the world and its problems? And Yuna does indeed eventually seek out different solutions to the problems of Spira, but it takes her a while to even identify the problems. Scratching the surface of this colorful game with the soothing island music reveals a very dark world, and unlike Final Fantasy VII or VIII that shows that conflict up front, Spira's conflict is hidden away behind a thick curtain. Yuna and most of her guardians sadly acknowledge the unfortunate truth that their young friend that they have watched grow up from childhood will be forced to give her life in the hope that others may have theirs. The teachings of Yu Yevon, whose priests lead the people of Spira, demand it, and have for 1,000 years. Why would this group of people think there's any other way? But Yuna is lucky to have on her guardian team Tidus, who comes from another world, Riku, who is Al Bhed and doesn't follow the teachings of Yu Yevon, and Auron, who had previously served as guardian to her father Braska and understands what the final summoning means. These three voices are able to cast enough doubt over the party that they start questioning tradition, and once a seed of doubt is planted, it changes how you see the world. Yuna and her team discover that one of the high priests of Yu Yevon, called Maesters, killed his own father. Shocked as they are, they decide to confront Maester Seymour and allow him to explain his actions. Instead, Seymour attacks them, and they end up killing him in self-defense. Later, they discover that Seymour was not sent as the dead are meant to be, and his undead spirit lingers in the world. They confront the other Maesters about this affront to the natural order, only to find out that they also are unsent. Essentially, they grew too attached to their power as religious leaders, and were unwilling to let it go even in death. Yuna is distraught by this revelation, since as a summoner she is extraordinarily devout to the teachings of Yu Yevon, and to uncover such deep hypocrisy at the highest level of the church is earth-shattering to her. She resolves to defeat sin without the support of the church, since her true loyalty is to the well-being of Spira and its people. And then they reach Zanarkand, the place Tidus and Jecht claim to be from, and the final stop for a summoner and her team. Here, Yuna's perception of the world is shattered in its entirety. She learns that Yunalesca, the daughter of Yu Yevon, still lingers in the world as an unsent, and it is she that grants the final Aeon to defeat Sin. She learns that Sin is actually an Aeon summoned as a shell around Yu Yevon himself, who has been in a trance-like dream for 1,000 years. And most impactfully, she learns that the final Aeon is born from one of her own guardians. The summoner's sacrifice enables one of the guardians to be transformed into the final Aeon, yes, to battle Sin, but also to become the new Sin following the Calm, It is a cycle of death and rebirth that Yu Yevon has been perpetuating for 1,000 years while he dreams. This is too far for Yuna. Her whole life she has been prepared to give up herself for the good of the world, but asking her to sacrifice one of her friends is too much, especially for such a futile purpose. It becomes apparent that in spite of her attempts to distance herself from those around her, she has become far too attached to her companions to succeed in her quest as a summoner. She defies Yunalesca, and emboldened by Auron, who has already suffered through this tragedy with Braska and Jecht, they defeat the ancient daughter of Yu Yevon and put an end to the cruel tradition of the final summoning once and for all. Now remember that 4-bar introduction I skipped earlier? Let's look back at it. It has pretty much nothing to do with the melodic and harmonic material that make up the bulk of the theme. It is sort of all over the place. We can see how this first bar may outline F major with some extended harmonies and a chromatic neighbor, but it lands on E, the leading tone, not a stable place to stop. The E does not resolve up to F like it ought to, and we also find out that this B natural wasn't just a neighbor tone, it's kind of here to stay. Are we sure this is F major? The flute has the melody, but it's just as disjunct as the piano. It starts on E and descends, then repeats this sequence that lands on C and finally B natural. The last chord we hear of the introduction is a cluster of E, G, A, and B natural, not a super convincing lead-in to F major. This only serves to make the melody sound all the more simple when it does start, in contrast to what came before. To me, these 4 bars are not so much an introduction to the theme itself, since it doesn't hint at any particular motifs or really even set up the key, but as an introduction to Yuna's theme. I think it serves as a way to contextualize Yuna. Yes, her melody is simple and straightforward, like her view of the world as we've discussed, but the world in which she exists is anything but simple and straightforward, instead being twisted and manipulated by powerful forces, some malevolent, some simply selfish, and some who have had enough of it all. As in real life, the world is messy and complicated. Trying to show that musically results in what we have here, but as I said before, it makes Yuna's actual theme appear all the more immature and naive. How can such a simple tune exist in such a non-tonal context? Now, it would be irresponsible at this point not to mention the main theme of the game, Suteki Dane. Uematsu considered this track to be Yuna's theme, in spite of there being another track specifically titled Yuna's theme that we've been looking at this whole time, but there may be a reason for this. Suteki Dane plays only once in the game, though several tracks adapt the melody. We hear it in its entirety during this scene depicting the blossoming romance between Yuna and Tidus, so it's considered this game's love song. The first half of this melody is in D minor, featuring this dactylic rhythm punctuating a general melodic rise and fall. We start on D and end on C with a minor half cadence, then the second phrase repeats the first, ending on D with an authentic cadence. Nothing groundbreaking here musically, just a pretty tune. But then the B section starts. Recognize it? We shift up to F major, the mediant, and look at that, it's Yuna's theme. So the question is Suteki Dane actually Yuna's theme, as Uematsu suggests, and what we've analyzed as Yuna's theme is excerpted? Or is Yuna's theme really Yuna's theme, and Suteki Dane quotes it to demonstrate how Yuna becomes wrapped up in this romance? Normally, I would be inclined to say, well, if Uematsu says it's Yuna's theme, then that's what it is, except for the fact that the first half of Shiteki Dane shows up in several places not specifically linked with Yuna. The Game Over music, the track Spira Unplugged, which plays as the player explores Besaid, Kilika, and the Thunder Plains Travel Agency, and A Fleeting Dream, which plays most notably when the party arrives at Zanarkand, although this one could be considered to be closely tied to Yuna's quest. For this reason, I think Yuna's theme is in fact the second half of Shiteki Dane, though I certainly couldn't say for sure which was composed first. Yuna is such a dynamic and interesting character, and while she may not be as famously loved as Aerith or Tifa, she is certainly deserving of attention. Final Fantasy X was the first in the series to include voice acting, and it faced some challenges in trying to dub the English voice actors over the Japanese mouth animations, and I think for this reason Yuna sometimes gets passed over when we talk about our favorite characters.
Too funny!
It was your idea!
But looking at her evolution over the game and how that is reflected in her musical theme reveals a strong, confident, and extraordinarily resilient person, and definitely one of my favorites. I hope you enjoyed this video analyzing Yuna's character and musical theme, and maybe you'll go back and enjoy playing or watching Final Fantasy X again with a new eye and ear towards her. Go ahead and like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Again, thank you to YouTube users ZakiPuffSnurple and The Gaming Bumpkin for recommending Yuna's theme to me for analysis. Let me know in the comments what other videos you'd like to see. I'll see you next time.